Hey everyone, welcome to this radio video. And I thought I'd probably do a video on some little tips on what I do actually when I want to listen to the radio. You know, radio listening is a great hobby, but it's so easy to get bored and do the same old thing every day and finally say, well, you know what, after an hour or half an hour, let's do something else. That's boring. And the problem is that we get into this, kind of schedule or this way of doing things that actually becomes a routine, and you just do every day. You just do the same thing. So you notice that I did a lot of videos and I listened to a lot of stuff. And one of the questions people ask me is, "Wow, how many hours do you listen to the radio?" The easy question, or the easy answer to that question, is as much as I can. I'm fortunate enough to have a schedule that lets me listen to the radio a lot more than probably most people, and at different times of day, quite easily. Another question, people say, well, you get these videos with all sorts of signals, and I never get these signals, and I think, maybe my antenna is no good. And the big part of a radio, of course, is the antenna, and that's for sure. You need to be in a spot with the lowest noise possible and the best antenna that you can actually put up. But it's not only that. A lot of what I put online that I've received by chance is actually just tuning around. And I don't know how many times I've said it through my videos. You have a tuning button on your radios. Use it. Now, some of the comments I got was, well, oh yeah, but you got that fancy radio that costs a lot, and that's why you receive stuff. It helps, but it's not the reason I receive stuff. If I was stuck with a portable receiver, I would still make a lot of videos and I would still show you that you can hear so many things even with a portable. What I would say that I do the most, probably in a week, some days I'm into program listening, and some days I'm into trying to DX or find stuff. So on some days, I will actually go online, check schedules, or listen to regular broadcasts. An example of that was last night. Last night, I turned on the radio, and apart from the fact that I heard MEC Shortwave Pirate that I've posted a video, I also tuned around and did mostly some program listening. So last night, I listened to Voice of Vietnam on 12,005 kilohertz. I listened to Radio Australia on 17,795. Also, I did listen to Radio New Zealand, which is one of my favorites in the evening before going to bed, actually in the summer. That's my favorite station. So, an hour before going to bed, I'll listen to a full hour of Radio New Zealand. But it's not every day that you want to listen to those broadcasts. It's not every day that their broadcast is interesting. That's one major thing. Shortwave broadcasts are fun, but it's like local TV or radio. There are some days that they talk about subjects that aren't interesting. Another thing that I don't like on shortwave is music. If you play a lot of music on your broadcast, I will probably, tune somewhere else. Not because I don't like music, I love music, but I don't think shortwave is a great place for music with all the fading and the propagation. And frankly, I'm open to all sorts of music, but some music played by some broadcasters aren't always interesting also. So, everybody has a different interest. Some people actually like listening to all sorts of music from everywhere, and that's okay. I like more the talk on the stations, talk about the countries, talk about news events, and so on. What do I do if I don't want to listen to broadcasts? So if I don't want to do a usual evening, because frankly, my usual evening, if I want to listen to international broadcasts, will be Radio Exterior de España in French at 2300 on 6055. Then I'll go into China Radio International on 9570 for a full hour at 0100. I'll go into, depending on my mood, Voice of Vietnam 12,005 for the 30 minutes, or Radio Romania French at 0100 for the full hour, and so on. At 02, I'll try to tune in either Radio Australia 17795, 0300, either Radio New Zealand or sometimes Voice of Turkey, which I also enjoy. And finally, Radio New Zealand for the last hour. This would be a typical radio evening if I don't want to tune around and try to find signals and stuff. But I'm the kind of guy that needs some action on the radio, so I'm the kind of guy that's going to tune around. So what do I do? What are my listening tips if I had some? First, know your frequency bands. That's very important. Know where the AM radio operators are. Know where the international broadcast bands are. And remember that in between all of that, there's lots of utility signals. And so I will start probably tuning an international broadcast band. So what I would do first, probably go into one of the bands that I see open that has lots of stations and start, tuning around and checking out what we can hear. As you see here, 19-meter band is very quiet at this time.
It's right there at the mothership.
So I'll take a band, tune in, and probably go first through the international broadcast bands and see what we can hear in the signals. If that turns out to be boring, and there's nothing new or nothing special that I can hear, because what's interesting about tuning these every day is that depending on propagation, you don't hear exactly the same thing. You just see here that it's quiet, but on some days propagation will make Chinese or Asian stations come in, and so on. So I think even if you aren't, if you listen one night and you say, well, there's nothing special, or 2 nights and there's nothing special, it doesn't mean there's nothing special all the time. There are some amazing propagation conditions at times that will actually be really interesting. So let's say I tuned around the international broadcast bands and said, well, kind of boring. My next choice, depending on what I want to do, would be maybe to go to amateur radio bands and see what stations from what country are audible on the bands. So what's nice about amateur radio bands is the fact that you can hear countries you won't hear on the international broadcast bands, and that's cool. You'll hear conversations of all sorts. That's also fun. Sometimes technical, sometimes personal. You can learn a lot of stuff by listening to the amateur radio bands, and it could be interesting. It can be a station that just wants to make contact with as many countries as possible, many stations. That's also fun from time to time because you hear all these countries in half an hour or an hour of listening. But I also do very, very often, and that probably is what gives me the most signals or unusual signals. I'll take a broadcast band. So for example, a 19-meter band right now. I'll go through it, see what we can hear, and if nothing interesting is there, Once I get to the top of that international broadcast band, so let's say here, 15,900, I'll switch to upper sideband, and I'll go to the next international broadcast band, but going through all the utility band in the middle. So I'll tune around slowly and try to hear any unusual signals in the frequency bands where we tend not to actually go very often. This is probably my biggest source of unusual signals, because you never know what you hear. You'll never know when you'll catch something unusual. And even though you do this every day, and for 4 or 5 days in a row, you say, well, there's nothing on 16 megahertz, for example, or nothing interesting. Tune it regularly. You never know, and you'll pick up stuff that are unusual and sometimes even amazing and mysterious. So I'll do that, tune in between, check out what I hear. Of course, on some days there's nothing, and you will hear nothing interesting or the usual signals that you'll catch very often. And once you've crossed it, this is an HF fax. Once you've crossed it, and maybe you're back into that international broadcast band, I've passed from the 19 to the 16 meter band that starts here. I go back into AM and tune this band and see what I can hear. And you know, I'm at the top, I'll do the same thing, go back into upper sideband. And I'll check for whatever signal I can hear. So that's pretty much my pattern of radio listening. And that's how I actually get signals and unusual signals and make videos of these weird signals of all sorts. And depending, of course, on the time of day, you know, we are, if you look at the clock here, it's 15:45. This is midday here. It's 11:45 a.m. Now the best time for radio listening. I'm not going to tune, for example, 6 megahertz at this time, because I know there's nothing there. And, you know, there's a very low probability I'll hear something here. Except maybe in the winter. In the winter time, shorter days, you have these signals on the lower bands that actually propagate. So, depends on the time of the year, because shortwave is like that. But you see that, you know, there's a little chance I'll hear something here. So, but in the evening, it's reversed. In the evening, I'll try 5 megahertz or 3 megahertz or so on. So that's pretty much my tuning habit. So, whatever you want to do with your receiver, if you've got sideband on your receiver, tune in between the bands. There's a lot of stuff to listen to. Even if you don't have sideband, upper lower sideband, you never know when something can, you know, pop up. One of my regular habits in the evening, even in the daytime, in evening and in the weekdays, of course, is always to check for pirates. I'll always go into the pirate section. I actually find it really cool to listen to a pirate station. It's one of my favorite radio listening experience on the radio. What I'll do sometimes is also, for example, we're in the daytime. Why not start way up high at 30 megahertz and say, well, I'm going to tune from 30 megahertz, go down, and see what I can hear. You never know also what you can hear from this. I've heard many signals doing this. So, hey, tune around. and check it out. Another good tip is to use the internet, and that's very, very important. Using the internet is one of the best things you can do. For example, if I am on a frequency and I hear a signal, well, the first thing that I'll do is go to Google, type in the frequency and the type of signal if possible. For example, on 16 megahertz you heard a little bit of HF facts, which is weather charts. What I would do if I want to know what station used that would be to simply go on Google, type shortwave, the exact frequency, HF facts, and there's a good chance that you'll stumble upon either a list or some groups or forums where people have posted, well, this is HF facts from this country at that time, and so on. Use the internet a lot for your identification of stations. It's very important. I use it a lot. So if I don't know what it is or wonder what it is, I'll post the frequency and try to see what we can hear. An example of my tuning habits that going through the bands or in between bands is the fact that I've been hearing a lot of MARS, which are the military affiliate radio system, the American military, doing some communications, just usually very close, not all the time, but usually very close to the amateur radio bands. That is something to check for. That's why going out of band and trying to listen for unusual signals will bring you stuff like that. So these are tips that I'm giving you guys to try to spice up your radio hobby. One of the things that's really, really, really important is that you gotta find new ways to listen to the radio hobby. If you're like me, if I had to listen to the same stations over and over again every day, well, I probably will get bored at some point. But what keeps me alive with the radio hobby is listening to all sorts of different signals. And that's really what I love. I'll have my evenings with, just the regular radio listening of international broadcasts. And I'll have my evenings of DX and listening to unusual signals. And even though it's much quieter than it was 20 years ago, and we have to admit that it is, there is thousands and thousands of signals on the HF band to listen to. So a great way to compensate, actually, and I use that a lot, is to go out of band and listen to unusual signals, because I was a big program listener, but I always was kind of utility DX, trying to find signals, but in the 80s I was probably at 80% a shortwave radio program listener, but the choice was so big in the 80s of what you could hear that it was difficult to get bored. But now it's much different, and we only have a few stations to listen to, so it really makes you get bored more easily, because it's not always interesting, and listening to the same stations over and over again is not always the best thing to do to keep up with radio. So that's when I tune around the bands. So hope these tips help. Hope you guys can try and listen to other stuff, and not just international broadcasts. I notice a lot of people saying, well, wow, you've got a great location, you hear stuff I don't hear. Don't be discouraged. I could be discouraged. Look at the noise level I have on 6 megahertz. Look at that. S9. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it is more. But even though I do have high noise level on some frequencies, I will still try to listen to singles. So it's easy to just, I've done it often. Turned off the radio because the noise level just made me mad. And I'd say, okay, and use the F word and just say, look, I'm shutting down and I'm gonna do something else. It happens from time to time, especially when you are like me and been listening for more than 30 years. And you remember 30 years ago how the S meter was pretty much at zero everywhere, or close to it. And you see the noise level now. It is something that gets annoying. And that's why doing little de-expeditions, taking your portable receivers, going to a park, hanging a little wire from a tree, far from houses, is actually something fun to do. So, find a way to make your hobby interesting. It's the only thing that you can do to keep it alive, because it's always interesting to keep it alive. So, hope these tips help, and 73.